They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood runs cold? When the very people who are supposed to protect you become the architects of your deepest nightmare? My name is Sarah, and for 15 years, I believed my brother Marcus had simply vanished into thin air. 15 years of sleepless nights, endless searches, and unanswered prayers. But the truth was sitting at my kitchen table every Sunday dinner, carving the roast and asking me to pass the salt. It started on a Tuesday in October, 3 months after my 30th birthday. Marcus would have been 28 that year, if he were still alive. If. That word had haunted me for so long, I'd forgotten what certainty felt like. I was cleaning out my late grandmother's attic when I found it, a shoebox tucked behind old Christmas decorations, covered in dust and secrets. Inside were photographs I'd never seen before. Pictures of Marcus that were taken after he supposedly disappeared. Pictures with timestamps that made my hands shake and my world crumble. There he was, my baby brother, standing next to our father in what looked like a cabin somewhere remote. The date stamp read 3 weeks after the police had closed his missing person case. 3 weeks after my parents had held that memorial service where my mother cried so convincingly that even I believed her grief was real. But Marcus wasn't missing in these photos. He was alive, smiling even, though something in his eyes looked different. Haunted. Afraid. I confronted my parents that same night. I drove to their house with those photographs burning a hole in my jacket pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. When I walked into their living room, they were watching the evening news, my father in his worn leather chair, my mother knitting something pink and innocent. They looked so normal, so ordinary. How do monsters manage to look so human? We need to talk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother looked up from her knitting, that same concerned expression she'd perfected over the years whenever Marcus's name came up. "What about, sweetheart?" she asked, and I almost laughed at the audacity. Almost. Instead, I pulled out the photographs and scattered them across their coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face went through a series of transformations: surprise, denial, calculation, and finally, something I'd never seen before, defeat. "Where did you find these?" he asked quietly, not even attempting to deny what was right in front of us. My mother had stopped knitting entirely, her hands frozen in place as if someone had pressed pause on her life. "Grandma's attic," I replied. "Now tell me where my brother is." What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about love, about the lengths people will go to protect themselves. My father stood up slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the garden where Marcus and I used to play hide and seek as children. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, empty of all the warmth I remembered from my childhood. "Marcus is dead, Sarah. He's been dead for 15 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dead. Not missing, not living somewhere far away under a new identity, not starting over in another country. Dead. How? I whispered, though part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. My mother finally found her voice, though it came out cracked and broken. "It was an accident. He was threatening to go to the police about your father's business dealings. Things got heated, and..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. You see, my father wasn't just the mild-mannered accountant everyone thought he was. For years, he'd been laundering money for some very dangerous people, using his legitimate business as a front. Marcus had found out, had threatened to expose everything unless Dad came clean. My brother always had this annoying moral compass that pointed true north no matter what. It's what made him special, and apparently, it's what got him killed. It was self-defense, my father said, finally turning away from the window. Marcus came at me with a kitchen knife. I was just trying to protect myself. But I could see the lie in his eyes, could hear it in the way his voice wavered on the word defense. This wasn't self-defense. This was a father who chose his criminal enterprise over his own son's life. This was murder, dressed up in justification and buried under 15 years of elaborate deception. The worst part wasn't even that they had killed him. The worst part was the performance they'd put on afterward. The fake searches, the tears, the way they comforted me when I cried myself to sleep wondering what had happened to my brother. They had turned his death into a family trauma that brought us closer together, made me depend on them more, trust them more. They had weaponized my grief and used it to control me. "Where is he buried?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. My mother looked at my father, some silent communication passing between them. "The cabin," she whispered. "About 4 hours north of here. There's a clearing behind it where we—" She couldn't finish, but I understood. They had buried my brother in some unmarked grave in the middle of nowhere, like he was nothing more than a family pet. I should have called the police right then. I should have walked out of that house and never looked back. But they were still my parents, and some twisted part of me still loved them despite everything they'd done. "Why didn't you just let him report you?" I asked. "You could have gone to prison, served your time, started over. Instead, you chose this." My father laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And lose everything? The house, the business, our reputation. Have you branded as the daughter of a criminal for the rest of your life? We did this for you too, Sarah. To protect our family name. Protect our family name." As if murder was somehow more respectable than money laundering. As if 15 years of lies was better than a few years of public shame. They had convinced themselves that they were heroes in this story, that killing Marcus was somehow a noble sacrifice for the greater good of the family. The delusion was staggering, and suddenly I understood why Marcus had looked so haunted in those final photographs. He had seen this madness up close, had tried to reason with it, and had died for his efforts. But those photographs raised another question, one that made my blood run cold. "If Marcus died in your confrontation," I said slowly, "then who took these pictures? When were they taken?" The look that passed between my parents then was pure terror, and I realized that the story they just told me was only the beginning. The truth was somehow even worse than I'd imagined. My mother started crying then, real tears this time, not the crocodile tears she'd perfected over the years. "He didn't die right away," she whispered. "The fight left him badly injured, but he was still alive. We kept him at the cabin for a few days while we decided what to do." The room started spinning around me. They had kidnapped their own son, held him prisoner while they debated his fate like he was some kind of problem to be solved rather than a human being. "He kept begging us to take him to a hospital," my father continued, his voice mechanical, like he was reading from a script. "But we couldn't risk him talking to the authorities. So we waited. We took care of his wounds as best we could, but infection set in. He developed a fever. By the 4th day, he was delirious, talking about seeing things that weren't there. They had watched their own child die slowly, suffering, probably in agony, and they had done nothing to save him. The photographs were taken on the 2nd day," my mother added quietly. We thought maybe we could find a way to make it work. Maybe convince him to disappear voluntarily, start over somewhere else. We wanted proof that he was okay, in case anyone asked questions later. They had documented their own crime, created evidence of their son's final days like some kind of sick insurance policy. I left that house that night and drove until I couldn't see straight anymore. I pulled over at a rest stop somewhere off the interstate and screamed until my throat was raw. I screamed for Marcus, for the brother I'd lost twice now, once to their lies and once to their truth. I screamed for the 15-year-old version of myself who had believed that families were supposed to protect each other, that parents were supposed to love their children unconditionally. I screamed for the innocence I would never get back. When I finally got home, I sat in my kitchen staring at those photographs until sunrise. Marcus looked so young in them, younger than I remembered. There was still hope in his face in the first few pictures, like he believed our parents would come to their senses, would choose him over their criminal enterprise. But in the later ones, that hope was fading, replaced by the terrible understanding that he was going to die and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I should have called the police. I should have turned them in without hesitation. But here's the thing about family, it doesn't stop being family just because it's broken. It doesn't stop hurting just because it should. I spent 3 days wrestling with what to do, and every time I picked up the phone to call the authorities, I heard my father's voice saying he'd done it to protect me too. Every time I imagined my parents in prison, I thought about Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and all the ways they'd been good to me even while lying about the most important thing in our lives. But Marcus deserved better than my cowardice. He deserved justice, even if it came 15 years too late. He deserved to be found, to be buried properly, to have his name cleared of whatever story my parents had invented about why he'd disappeared. So I made the call. The detective who took my statement was a woman about my age named Rodriguez. She had kind eyes but a hard edge that told me she'd seen enough family secrets to fill several lifetimes. "I have to ask," she said after I'd finished my story, "why are you coming forward now? Why not protect your parents like they protected each other?" The answer surprised me with its simplicity. "Because I'm not them," I said. "And because Marcus would have done the right thing, even if it cost him everything." It did cost him everything. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. Armed with the photographs and my testimony, police obtained a warrant to search the cabin. They found Marcus exactly where my parents said they'd buried him, in a shallow grave behind a property my father had purchased under a false name. The coroner confirmed that he'd died from complications related to blunt force trauma and infection, that he'd suffered for days before finally succumbing to his injuries. My parents were arrested on charges of murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. The money laundering charges came later, after investigators dug deeper into my father's business dealings. They found a network of corruption that stretched back 20 years, millions of dollars in dirty money that had paid for our comfortable suburban life. Everything I'd grown up with had been built on a foundation of crime and violence. The trial was a media circus. Local family's dark secret exposed, and, brother's murder covered up for 15 years, the headlines wrote themselves. I testified against my own parents, looked them in the eye and told the world what they'd done to Marcus. My mother cried throughout my testimony, but I couldn't tell if her tears were for Marcus or for herself. My father just stared at me with something that looked like disappointment, as if I was the one who had betrayed the family. They were both convicted. My father got life without parole for first-degree murder. My mother received 25 years for being an accessory after the fact and for her role in the kidnapping. The judge said their actions represented a profound betrayal of the most basic human bonds, and that their 15-year deception had compounded their crimes immeasurably. I agreed with every word. But here's what the judge didn't say, what the newspapers couldn't capture: how it feels to realize that your entire life has been built on a lie. How it feels to know that every family dinner, every holiday celebration, every moment of happiness you shared was happening on top of your brother's grave. How it feels to understand that the people who were supposed to love you most were capable of watching their own child die rather than face the consequences of their choices. I buried Marcus properly this time, in the cemetery where our grandparents rest. I bought him a headstone that tells the truth about when he died, not the fiction my parents created. I visit him every week and tell him about my life, about the therapy I'm in, about how I'm trying to rebuild my sense of what family means. Sometimes I apologize for taking so long to find the truth. Sometimes I just sit there and cry for the conversations we'll never have, the relationship we'll never repair. People ask me if I regret turning my parents in, if I miss them now that they're in prison. The answer is complicated. I miss the parents I thought I had, the ones who existed before I knew what they were capable of. I miss the version of our family that never really existed, the one where we were normal people who loved each other without conditions or criminal conspiracies. But I don't regret giving Marcus the justice he deserved, even if it came at the cost of everything else. The hardest part is learning to trust again, to believe that the people who claim to love you won't sacrifice you for their own convenience. It's learning to recognize red flags in relationships, to understand that love without honesty isn't really love at all. It's accepting that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we trusted most completely. I've started dating again, slowly and carefully. I told my current partner about Marcus and my parents after 6 months together. I watched his face as I explained how my brother died, how my parents covered it up, how I'd testified against them. I waited for him to run, to decide that my family baggage was too heavy to carry. Instead, he held my hand and said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that alone for so long." It was the first time in years that someone's reaction to my story felt like healing instead of judgment. The money my father laundered has been seized by the government, along with our family home and most of their assets. I kept a few photographs from before Marcus disappeared, back when we were still innocent enough to believe in happy endings. Sometimes I look at them and try to spot the signs of what was coming, the cracks in the foundation that would eventually bring everything down. But we just look like a normal family, parents and children gathered around a Christmas tree or posing by a lake somewhere, smiling like we had nothing to hide. Marcus would be 43 now if he'd lived. Sometimes I imagine what his life might have been like, whether he'd have gotten married, had children, found a career that matched his moral convictions. I imagine him as an uncle to the children I might have someday, teaching them the difference between right and wrong in ways our parents never did. I imagine growing old with him, having someone who shared my memories of childhood before everything went dark. But mostly I try not to think about the what-ifs. They'll drive you crazy if you let them, all those alternate timelines where different choices led to different outcomes. Instead, I focus on honoring Marcus's memory by living the kind of life he would have been proud of, honest, principled, uncompromising when it comes to doing what's right even when it's difficult. The detective, Rodriguez, sent me a card after the trial ended. "Your brother would be proud of you," she wrote. "It takes incredible courage to choose justice over family loyalty, especially when the cost is so high." I keep that card in my wallet, next to the last picture ever taken of Marcus and me together. We're teenagers in it, arms around each other, both of us laughing at something just outside the frame. We look so young, so trusting, so convinced that the people who loved us would never hurt us. I wish I could go back and warn that version of myself about what was coming. I'd tell her to pay closer attention to the conversations that stopped when she entered the room, to the phone calls my father took in his study with the door locked, to the way my parents' story about Marcus's disappearance changed slightly each time they told it. I'd tell her that families aren't immune to evil, that blood relation doesn't guarantee moral behavior, that sometimes the people who claim to protect you are the ones you need protection from. But maybe that innocence was necessary for a while. Maybe I needed to believe in the fiction of our family in order to survive the truth when it finally surfaced. Maybe that 15-year-old girl, crying herself to sleep and wondering where her brother had gone, wasn't ready to learn that he was already dead, killed by the very people she trusted to keep her safe. The truth about Marcus's death has changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more suspicious now, less willing to take people at their word without verification. I'm hypervigilant about inconsistencies in stories, about people who seem too good to be true. But I'm also more appreciative of genuine kindness when I encounter it, more grateful for relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. I've learned the difference between love and control, between protection and possession. My therapist says it's normal to feel guilty about surviving when Marcus didn't, about having 15 years of life that were stolen from him. She says it's normal to wonder if I could have done something differently, if I could have saved him somehow. But I was just a child when he disappeared, no more equipped to recognize the danger in our own home than he was. We were both victims of people who chose their own interests over their children's lives. Sometimes people ask me how I can function knowing what I know about my parents, how I manage to get up every morning and live a normal life. The answer is that normal is relative, and my definition of it has expanded considerably. Normal now includes therapy appointments and court dates and visits to my brother's grave. Normal includes explaining to new friends why I don't have any family photos in my apartment, why I spend holidays alone or with chosen family instead of blood relatives. Normal includes carrying the weight of terrible knowledge while still finding reasons to smile, to hope, to believe in the possibility of love that doesn't come with conditions or crimes attached. I've thought about writing a book about all this, about sharing Marcus's story more widely. Part of me thinks it would help other people who might be living with similar family secrets, who might be struggling with the cognitive dissonance of loving people who have done unforgivable things. But another part of me worries about turning my brother's death into entertainment, about reducing his life to a cautionary tale or a sensational true crime story. For now, I'm content to honor his memory more quietly. I volunteer with organizations that help locate missing persons, that support families who are searching for loved ones. I know firsthand how precious those families are, how they cling to hope even when logic suggests it's futile. I also know how it feels when that hope is finally answered with the worst possible news, and I try to be there for them in ways that no one was there for me during those first terrible days after learning the truth. The cabin where Marcus died has been torn down. I drove up there once, about a year after the trial, just to see the empty lot where it used to stand. There's nothing there now but trees and grass and the kind of peaceful silence that seems impossible given what happened in that place. I brought flowers and left them where I thought the cabin door might have been, and I told Marcus that he could rest now, that the truth was finally out and justice had been served. I don't know if he can hear me when I talk to him, but it doesn't really matter. The talking is as much for me as it is for him, a way of maintaining our relationship despite death and time and all the lies that came between us. He'll always be my little brother, the one who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my homework and believed in doing the right thing even when it was dangerous. The circumstances of his death don't change who he was in life, and I refuse to let our parents' crimes overshadow his essential goodness. In the end, that's what this story is really about. Not the horrible things people are capable of doing to each other, but the love that survives even the worst betrayals. Not the lies that can destroy a family, but the truth that can set it free, even if freedom comes at an unimaginable cost. Not the brother I lost to violence and deception, but the brother I found again through courage and justice and the simple act of refusing to let his story end in silence. Marcus is gone, has been gone for 15 years now, but he's not lost anymore. He has a name on a headstone, a story that's been told honestly, and a sister who will never stop fighting for his memory. And maybe, in a world where family can mean so many different things, that's enough. Maybe that's how we honor the dead, not by forgetting the truth of how they died, but by ensuring that truth serves the living who come after them. That's my brother's legacy now, a reminder that justice delayed is not always justice denied, that silence can be broken no matter how long it's been maintained, and that love, real love, honest love, means choosing truth over comfort, courage over convenience, and the difficult right over the easy wrong. Marcus knew that 15 years ago when he confronted our father. I know it now as I tell his story. And someday, maybe that knowledge will save someone else's brother, someone else's family, someone else's life. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth fighting for. Marcus taught me that, even in death. Even now.